Now, that's not usually the music we start off with, but it is very fitting to today's program. My name's Stuart Scott. I'm the host for today. Here's an email address you can contact me at, or we'll give it again at the end of the program. And today's guest I have with me, Michael Wadleigh, who's the director of the film Woodstock, Academy Award-winning film. Michael's background, he's got various degrees with a focus on physics, chemistry, biology, anthropology, and dramatic literature. So how did you end up as a film director? All from Columbia University. And today's program, Woodstock plus 50. Now, there was a great expectation there'd be another Woodstock this year, but it failed because it was looking for money, and they couldn't get enough investors to take a risk. Let me read this quote from Albert Einstein. "The laws of man must obey the laws of nature, which science, not politics, discovers, or man will not survive." Now, this is the town of Woodstock in 1901, and at this point I'll ask Michael to let us know what is the significance of this town.
Well, if you go outside of New York City, you go across a flatland that has not much interest and is pretty built up now, and it was even back then. And then you hit the mountains. And Woodstock, New York, was right there nestled in the mountains. So for many years, beginning about 1860 after the Civil War, it became a center for intellectual thought for people who wanted to get back to nature. And here's one of them. This is the famous Woody Guthrie. He came there in the 1930s, and of course he was very famous for merging music and politics. You see it says on his guitar, "This machine kills fascists," and inspired a lot of people to do a lot of things, including to sing along to "This land is your land, this land is my land." And of course, this woman was incalculably valuable to the environmental movement. In fact, many people think she began it with Silent Spring. I'm speaking of Rachel Carson. She came up there and talked about destruction of nature, wholesale destruction of nature, out of which we humans, all our products, and all of life are made. That was really the theme. She brought it to Woodstock, New York. Many people came up there, again, to get out of New York City and talk about nature in the setting of nature.
We can't pay enough homage to Rachel Carson. She really, in some ways, was the beginning of the environmental movement.
And here's my man, Buckminster Fuller. He's well known for the geodesic domes, but many people think he's one of the great intellectuals of the 20th century. In 1967, you'll see right there, was the first color photograph of Earth. It was put together as a mosaic. And he wrote the operating manual for Spaceship Earth. The whole idea was it's a small vessel. It contains a few people. We only have limited resources, and if we don't take care of them, we're finished. And now here's Dr. Frank Fraser Darling, 1969 on the BBC prestigious Reith Lectures. He warned, "We are changing the climate." The warnings on climate change go back to 1969, 50 years ago.
I sometimes mention that Dr. James Hansen really woke us up in 1988 testifying to Congress, but it was known way before that. Greta Thunberg, she's the fourth cousin of Svante Arrhenius, who's credited with discovering our carbon dioxide emissions would eventually heat the planet. Fourth generation down. Of course, this is one of the most famous shots of Woodstock, the original Woodstock in 1969. And the phrase at the bottom, "We're caught in the devil's bargain, and we've got to get back to the garden." And that really puts it very, very clearly. Since then, it appears we took the wrong turn. We got further caught in the devil's bargain. We still have to get back to the garden, restoration of the garden. Now, I've got a bit of music from Woodstock that's worth a listen.
It's been a long time coming.
And clearly this shows the conversion from a farm to a concert arena.
In many ways, the idea was a pilgrim's progress back to the garden. the promoters were offered stadiums, motor speedways, and so on. They said that would ruin the event. The whole idea was to rejoin nature, not to be separated from it. There was nothing on sale there. That was deliberate. Everything was kept as non-commercial as possible.
Turn any corner. Here, you must hear what the people say.
Now we get political.
No, we get back to the garden.
It's going on around here. It surely won't stand the light of day. No.
And it appears to be a long haul.
Yes, it does.
Appears to be a long haul. Appears to be a long haul. Time, such a long, long time before the dawn.
Here are the Republicans, but they're gardening.
Speak out. You got to speak out against the madness. You got to speak your mind if you dare.
Now, you could say the problem with 25 years of cops is that they haven't spoken out against the madness. They haven't spoken their minds if they dare.
Don't try to get yourself elected.
You're gonna cut your hair. And of course, that's metaphoric. Maybe it's going down to the axons and dendrites of your brain, right, if you get elected. Cut your brain.
Cutting your hair is a metaphor for capitulation with the system, being co-opted. You cut your hair, you put on a suit. I mean, today I wore my banker's tie. I used to work for the banking industry many, many, many years ago, in another lifetime almost. So let me take it off. I don't need that.
Right on, Stuart.
So there's Woodstock. There's the venue with all the fences torn down. I'm sorry, I'm actually getting a little hot in here, so I want to show my true colors. And I want to state that even inside the bankers and the corporate CEOs and the politicians who seem so clueless and corrupt, there's a soul, a spirit. There's some spark of ethics inside them. We have to find that and get them to realize it.
Well said, Stuart. And thanks for all the events that you put on over the years. You've certainly done your part to try to do it.
Take it away, Michael.
Okay, now the logo for the festival was over there on the left, the dove sitting on the guitar. The whole idea was nature and music. Now, the movie opened just 1 month before the first Earth Day in 1970, and you can see there that millions were on the streets and out in the towns for the first Earth Day. And now, 50 years later, it's as if all the millions that were demonstrating then and all the millions demonstrating today and all the conferences that have happened, which are now up into the thousands, never even happened. Now, here are the only two graphs you need to track whether we're going to make it as a species or not. On the left is natural resource extraction, and on the right is atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations, right? On the left, that means what we're doing in terms of destroying the garden. In the last 50 years, we've extracted nearly 4 times. It's gone up 4 times in just 50 years to current 97 billion tons of resources ripped out of the ground. That includes biomass, metals, minerals, and of course, fossil fuels. It's gone up by 2.5% every year. And then if you go to the warming, global warming, we've done nothing to stop that one. They're heading straight up to hell, as you can see. So that warming, the atmospheric effect, has increased 2 times and more. We're now up to 56 billion tons of carbon equivalent per year, and that's increasing at 1.5%. But hang on to your hats. The real fact that we should worry about is that in the next 35 years, natural resource extractions and fossil fuels fossil fuel emissions are going to increase as much as they did in 300,000 years. That's the time of our Homo sapiens species. 35 years is equaling 300,000 years. And that means on those science trends, we're headed for social economic collapse, nothing less. Now here's the good news of how to stop it. Now, you remember all that all nations have agreed to sustainably develop, and that means that we meet the needs of present generations without compromising the future of the next generations. And to do that, the greatest scientists we have for natural resources, IRP, International Resource Panel, have determined that we all need, every nation needs to get down to 7 tons extraction per capita per year by the year 2050. So to give you an example of Sweden, Sweden is currently at 24 tons extraction per year, so clearly they're way the hell over the limit. They're increasing 2%, they're not going down at all. And that means that by the laws, by their responsibility for consumption, they should be dropping to 4% per year. So we've dealt with nature destruction. Now we're going to a subcategory of nature destruction, and that is stabilizing greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. We have to do that in order to limit global warming to either 1.5 or 2C. So the science limit in CO2, we can do 117 tons per person for CO2 by 2100. We can only do a very small 32 tons for 1.5, and that's with no overshoot for 1.5 or 2C, and that's with no negative emissions, which science says we may not know how to do. Now, Sweden emits 7 tons per year, so that's far over the limit. So they are not decreasing emissions at all, and they should reduce CO2 6% for 2C and a whopping 21% for 1.5C. That's per year, that's by law. Now, here you see 2 Science Academy presidents who back what I'm saying here. On the left is Dan, a Science Academy president of Sweden. They give out the Nobel Prizes and so forth. And on the right is a good friend of ours, Esther. She is the first woman doctor in Tanzania, and she's the president of that Science Academy. And look at the contrast. While Sweden must cut now, by responsibility, consumption 4%, CO2 6% for 2C, and 21% for 1.5, look what Esther and all the other Tanzanians have to do. They can increase consumption 5%, they can increase CO2 3% for 2C, and increase 1.5% for 1C. So that's the whole idea. You can go to Our Future Uncompromised, and you can download all 197 nations. One size does not fit all. Clearly it does not. Now, Esther's going to make a big point here, which is very important. Not many Tanzanians fly anywhere, right? Now, the whole point is that if every one of us on the planet didn't fly, we would only save 1.5% of total greenhouse gas emissions globally. 1.5%. That doesn't mean we shouldn't fly. We should just put it in perspective. That's only 1.5% of the problem. Next, if all of us didn't meet to the maximum capacity globally, which science thinks we could do, then we would save another 7% of global greenhouse gases. So now we're up to 8.5% of what we need to save. So Esther's point is all of these actions are really good actions, but they have to fit into a national total, like you see on the left there, so that Sweden has to have the national total, all the other emission cuts beneath it fit into that. Nations are monitored, small individual actions are not, cities are not, companies are not. Now, from my degree in physics, Earth is a closed mass system. We don't get in many asteroids. The last time we imported anything was back 50 years ago when the astronauts brought back a miserable 385 kilograms of moon rocks. So we've got to reduce our extractions, right? That is the killer. Our extractions of biomass, metals, minerals, and of course fossil fuels, they've all got to go to zero. So the first closed mass law is that we must leave everything in the ground as much as possible, all of it. So that's minus mass, as we would say in physics. The next is that we must make the best products, and that means that we can't do any greenhouse gas products. Those are all bad products. The next point is we've got to make products that last. If we dig it out of the ground and we make one product, by the laws of entropy, that product should last, in theory, forever. Otherwise, we're not getting the best benefit out of it. And then all the products should be shared. Why? Because that extends the utility in space, because that means more people get the benefit out of the product. The last is that we must make cyclical products. However, we are not. Do you know the amount of material that ends up that we have used in other products into a new product is 0.7%. That's it. 0.7% is the global recycling rate, and that doesn't work. Now, the final point is that we must reduce population. Wouldn't this planet be great if we only had 1,000 people or 1 billion people? But let's think about this one. Where should we reduce population? If you want to get a big whack, go to Sweden or Western Europe or the United States. Because if you simply reduce the population by 1 person there, you will equal 46 people in Africa. Why? Because the Swedes and Americans and so on use up so many things. They are destroying Earth at such a rate that their destruction is equal to 46 Africans. Think about that one.
Of course, population or overpopulation is the
right.
elephant hiding in the room. No mention of it, no talk of it. I think we did the only press conference that even mentioned the word, and it was completely on overpopulation.
Good for you. Now, here's a slide from Woodstock, and it illustrates a big point. If you went to Mark Zuckerberg, he would tell you, I got a big problem selling people junk, right? Which is the way he earns his money. But his psychologists and sociologists and all the scientists that he has tell him that what people really want to make them happy is Facebook. They want to connect with other people. They want to have activities. They want to be in nature. Look at that photo. There are no products in that photo, and the whole point is that Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, they all trick you. They put the beautiful connection pictures of human beings, and then they try to sell you the products because you want the human beings, you want the activity, you want the nature. Just remember that. Giving up these products, which are the main destruction of nature, doesn't have to be painful. We don't really want them in the first place. All right, here, the cost. How much do you love me, Mom and Dad? Well, what's interesting, if you go back to World War II or to anyone's major war, war will cost a nation to survive and not being occupied and destroyed by another nation 50% of GDP. Most rich countries, like the UK, are not even spending now, and they're not planning to spend even 1% of GDP, which happens to be the cost of a Starbucks cup of coffee per person per day. Now, let's get real. How much do you love me, Mom and Dad? Allocate 90% of your GDP to the here and now and to yourselves. Let's set aside 10% of that GDP for the future. That's a good deal. And in my opinion, all kids should hammer on their parents in this thing. You're the voters. In democracy, the people rule. Don't bang on the governments. Get your own parents to go out there and demand of the governments that they spend 10% of GDP to reduce the emissions and extractions for the appropriate level for each nation, by responsibility, of course. Now here you can see the examples here. Now you don't see the usual characters here, do you? In the US, China, India, and so on. These are the very high developed nations. These are the richest and the best educated and the nations that live the longest. If these nations can't lead, forget it. They set the example for the entire world. They really do. All Chinese, all Indians, everybody else wants to live at the level of these nations. So even though they're small, they are the very important element that we need, which is LEADERSHIP. That spells leadership.
These countries are supposed to be the most ethical in the world, and yet they still have a split personality where they're extracting oil. They're living beyond our means.
Way beyond. Imagine, instead of having 197 nations, imagine that we're just 197 people on a tiny little planet. We would make the decisions to save our future in a living moment, wouldn't we? We wouldn't argue, we'd just do it. We're a small planet. To survive, we must reduce our natural resource consumption to 7 tons per person per year by 2050. It's that simple, right? And it's doable, it's easy. As I say, happiness is not these products that really reduce the natural resources that we have available. And the second thing we have to do is that if we want to get rid of climate change, then per person, we got to reduce to the total by 2100, 32 tons for 1.5C or 177 tons for 2C. It's really simple. And think about it. If you think it's too complex, imagine 197 people on a small planet, and away goes the complexity, and we can do it.
I've got to name the devil at this point. We're talking about an economic system. It's not the only one possible. I myself try to promote ecological economics, a whole different take on the relationship between nature and the economy. But the one we've got was put in place by bankers because it benefited bankers the most. We've got to dump that system. It's the stranglehold. It's the stranglehold that China and other Western nations have on the resource-rich, undeveloped nations. We've got to get out of that system or we're dead meat. Again, the laws of man must obey the laws of nature or man will not survive. Now, I'd like to play a little bit more music for you. This was written after Woodstock by Joni Mitchell. Listen to her clarion call.
We are stardust, billion-year-old carbon. We are golden, caught in the devil's bargain, and we got to get ourselves back to the garden.
Getting back to the garden is not going somewhere. It's going to take some heavy lifting on the part of us and our allies and the youth leaders of the world who can turn out 500,000 people like Woodstock did for a demonstration in Madrid the other night. God bless Greta Thunberg. We need to get the world back into a garden consciousness, into a natural state, an awareness that we depend upon nature. Get out of the money.
And just remember, it takes science. We've got to get to those science numbers. 7 tons by 2050 limits. Thanks.
We have a minute left. Would you like to ask your question?
It's really, do I dare ask this question to what is your suggestion to get to the population control that you are suggesting? So what do we do?
I would suggest that population is a distraction. It's going to take too long. What we've got to do is get countries like Sweden and the ones that I put up there to start cutting their emissions. Sweden isn't cutting their emissions at all, and they're increasing their consumption. So we got to do it now this year.
My response to that is it's an all of the above. We got to try everything. Okay, thank you for coming today. Again, I'm your host, Stuart Scott. This is the email address I promised you at the end, and we've come to you live from the climate negotiations in Madrid, Spain.